Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Monday, January 24th. This is going to be a quick update for AMC. So today was definitely interesting in that we may or may not. I've been saying it a lot lately, but I really do think that we may be very close, if not at the bottom. 1450 was kind of this area, and I know we went below that today. I think we went down to like 1420 something. Yeah, it looks like 1424 maybe was the bottom. But that was the region that I felt like if we were gonna go down, that would be like the farthest we may go. Um, I'm hopping around a little bit. Hang on. And I had drawn up this chart quite a bit ago with the hopes that we were going to rebound at some other levels. I mean, you had these two competing wedges, and there's a lot going on in this chart, and it may be a little bit confusing. But basically, like, this green wedge was the first one that everyone kind of drew, and then this is a descending wedge that is really the wedge that we're in. And then I drew like a master one that kind of ignored this region. If you were just to ignore the green wedge and ignore like this breakout, and it actually tracked really well up until right about this pocket. And at that point, clearly the red had been favored. So if you're looking at this from just a very basic TA standpoint, this is a falling wedge, and we just hit the bottom. Okay, so we really are in the pocket now. Now, you might be asking, is there more downside? Are we going to see more downside this week? The short answer is maybe. I don't like to be super certain about things if I'm not super certain about them. So the big problem here is that when they enter a zone, they like to trade it. And it's a little unusual if it's a true spring action, which granted, like, this has all been just sort of a redistribution, right? If it's a true spring action, then they don't need to spend a lot of time in that region. However, that being said, has this region been heavily traded? Well, arguably, if you look here, not really. I mean, up in like the 1620 to 16 to 1720 range, that region has not been as heavily traded. I think if you look at the next gap up is really that $21 range. So beyond that, a lot of this has been heavily traded. So even though I marked these regions out, like, there's quite a bit of trading that's happened here. I think what would happen here may be fairly brief. And really what I'm looking at is way up here, because beyond where we are currently, the next major gap areas are like way up here. I mean, if you look at this lower region, right? Let's say we fill in these gap areas here, here, and here. Well, you've got a small one maybe around that 32 range, but it's not significant. It's just enough to like get up there, do some sideways action, and then move on. This isn't even really like a very strong, like, needing to trade region. It's just that this is across from like the main cliff, right around like 40 something. So my thoughts are, once we get past sort of these two pockets, well, these little ones down here and then these two bigger ones, I really don't think there's going to be a lot of resistance at all until we get about to 52. We may trade sideways there for a bit, but then look at the region above 52. So 60 down to about 52 has some pretty decent trading, but you could definitely see us spending a little bit more time there. But specifically this region, like 60 to 72, it's almost completely untouched. And we know that when AMC travels very quickly, and really any stock, that our composite EMU is going to come back through it, right? And trade these regions heavily as possible. So what we're looking at now is whether or not we're going to stay in this lower pocket for a little longer, or we're going to come to this upper pocket. And I talked about that in a previous video. So with all that being said, today I was sort of looking at a couple different charts. We'll come back to this one. This is specifically something that I noticed today. I was drawing as these things were falling down. I was like looking at a similar region, and one of the similar regions is this right here. It's the same fractal right in this particular range. And before you get like kind of like, well, I don't like, how is that the same, so on and so forth. Well, it doesn't mean that from here on it's going to look identical. I did draw it out good ways because I was mapping it based on some of these other ones. And as you can see, that first V shape tends to sort of bounce up to about the 2.5 level on most of these. So my thought is that was a pretty reasonable place to place it. But specifically, I started just looking at the relationships. I'm going to get rid of the VPVR for just a second. It's crowding the screen. Just looked at the relationships here of what's going on. So in this region, you have a setup range. And then what happens is that basically, I guess I kind of need the VPR. If you look at what's been traded in this region, you can see this is the most heavily traded region, right? Right, kind of here on the, I believe that's the 382. I did this upside down because I just wanted to color code it that way, but it's the same. You can flip it around. It would be the 618 if you're going vertically, right? But I was just looking at how it set up, and you can see that when it starts, it actually almost always bounces on the 382. And it did this every time it came down into a new region. So this is really interesting. When it stair stepped down, it bounced right here. See that? On the 382, it establishes a range immediately when it comes into a zone. Here's the bounce on the 382. And then once it does that, as it walks down, basically what I was looking at is, okay, how did this traverse, right, to get all of the liquidity? Like, how did it trade this region? And what it did is it set up these like markers early on. And these markers, we revisit them later as you move through. So I did it like 3 different colors, orange, blue, and green. And the first marker, orange, is kind of this upper pocket region, all right? These top 2 sectors, and then a little bit in the middle. I kind of fudged it here, and I think I changed this and slightly different than the way I set it up. So it looks a little off. Like this should be a little lower, but maybe it's because of this over here. It doesn't matter. You get the point, right? The middle region, blue, bottom region, green. And it actually was really cool. It did, in fact, when I first charted it, what I was doing is I looked at whether or not it filled up. So I'm using black right now, but let's say this region's been traded enough, right? The goal here is to sort of like fill up all these regions, right? So here, this is traded. This doesn't get traded that much up in the top region. You can see it never does. But this right here, this got traded right here, here, and also here. And then this particular region gets traded a good bit right there and a little bit early on. But yeah, as you keep moving forward, basically, you can see that this is how it is sort of like navigated. So by the time it was through all of this, it had obviously gone from top to bottom to top to bottom, up and down through this region. But specifically, it's stopping in these sectors, and it's not really going back and too much, right, to the same place it's already been. And this is one of the things that I've been talking about for really a little while. But a father who does Wyckofian stuff, talked about his stuff a good bit, introduced me to like this idea of like liquidity zones and how the composite emu is going to go through each of these zones and just sort of pick up and trade shares, right, until it's ready to move on. And seeing that really kind of opened my eyes to like, okay, if we have a range, we should be able to sort of track how a fractal might move through that range. So how a fractal sequence, if we know it's going to be the cat ears or something like that, right? Or if it's going to be a T1 followed by a T2, T3, we should be able to, and that's what this is, right? It's like we should be able to track that if we can understand how it sets up the range. So I started trying to develop sort of rules for it. And it was, of course, it was kind of thrown out the window right away today. But the reason that I'm bringing all this up is because I found that it always retests the 618 when it's stepping down. at least in the last like 4 instances, and it even did it today, it came back up and retested this 618 region of the previous range. It also tends to end the range between the 2.5 and the 3.82. So this upper region is sort of where we see like the breakdown every time. And then I already talked about the bounce. And then from there, it's pretty random. Like it doesn't, sometimes it's like an ascending accumulation. Sometimes it's very like up, down, middle, up, down, right? And then sometimes it's the same, like it's like all the way up, almost, this is sort of like the middle first, right? And it doesn't even really trade heavily, some of these regions. So I was thinking like that may be how it sets up. But today is kind of weird. We have a lot going on. And this is where things are going to get a little bit confusing if you're not already confused. Basically, my understanding of what was going on was that this was going to be a bridge, either a bridge, right? Because remember, we didn't know, like this doesn't exist, right? Before today. And I mentioned in the last video, I thought that after this is either going to run up and we're going to finish this fractal and this will be the bridge, or you're going to get the bridge. And so that's what happened. This morning it broke down, we got the bridge. Then I started looking back at other fractal sequences and I was like, okay, well this does look a lot like certain things we've seen before. I'm not really sure how this is going to play out. And to be very frank, like it's just kind of like confusing. It doesn't really look like anything else we've seen because it's so dramatic. Like it's so much volatility. And then if you look at this, there's just it's like a straight line, right? It's very mechanical. Definitely, institutional accumulation here, just walking it up, walking it down. I mean, it's just like pinpoint. I mean, it's almost silly, right? And seeing that, it was really hard to know like where are we in this fractal sequence. It's all just a straight line. So it masks itself pretty well. However, at the end of the day, I felt like this is more likely actually is the bridge, right? From here all the way up to here. And there's a reason for that. So I'm going to kind of jump over to another chart and I'll show you why I think that this is the bridge for this particular sequence, even though it looks really clunky. This chart kind of tipped me off today. So we had this weird sort of convergence here. And it's really more or less around like either from $19 to $20, something like that. I just kind of eyeballed it a couple different ways. And it's all these speed lines. They're like kind of pointing, right? You can see that as we've dropped, the drops have become more severe, right? You can see the angle of these drops has become more and more severe, almost straight up and down right here. However, likewise, the angle of the rises has also become more severe. And it seemed to be pointing to this sort of middle point. The last time that happened, we had a breakdown. The last time I can remember that happening was way back here. And it was very similar where we had this arc pattern here that I drew up. And it seemed like we were sort of converging. It's not really showing it very well, but you can kind of see these swooping arcs. And it was following really well until it didn't. And then all of a sudden it just broke down and it was like really bloody after that point. So I was like, well, maybe I should do that again. And so I did. And sure enough, it's actually very, very, it almost like hits these like waves, on a beach. It's very interesting. It's not perfect, but it is pretty convincing. You can see that the way it navigates, it did seem to sort of follow this sort of bubble, if you will. And I was like, wait a minute, maybe I should redraw not the cats, but redraw the arc that I had drawn. You remember I had drawn, it was like a few videos ago, and I also was posting about it a little bit. I had drawn this arc and I gave up on it because I was drawing it from here to here. And it was very, very like swooping, right? It didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Later, I did try this, but I just couldn't figure out how to chart it. Well, now here we are, and I'm actually pretty convinced that this is an entire like spring sequence. And the reason that I can say that with somewhat of like a confidence is because um, basically like this is a spring and then this is also a spring. They're two halves. And that's what happens within these spring fractals. So if you were to look at, let me look at one that's not covered in cats. If you were to look at, there it is. If you were to look at this is like a normal one, right? And you can see that there's actually one on this side, cat on this side, and a cat on this side. They're on both. And in the middle, there's a bridge. And originally I was like, and I call this the cliff and I call this the peak. And these are like your two towers, right? And often you'll see them in the middle as well. So with that being said, I was like, well, does it work, right, on the short term to say that? And does it work on the long term to say that? Well, in the short term, this would be a cliff, this would be the peak. And you do have that fractal sequence here. It's not easy to see, but I went to the 1 minute and checked it out. And it's there, it's just kind of flat, you know? So you do get those little towers on the turns, and then the top actually is a pretty decent fractal match to a normal spring fractal on the peak. It's just really low. It's kind of awkward. And then this is also very confusing to me. And I think mostly this is just retail or institutions just getting ready, right, for this and not knowing exactly what's going to happen next, perhaps, in some cases. Misreading it. And I don't have any other really great explanation for the amount of volume in this region, except that it was back and forth and it was being pinned a lot. So that being said, what we would expect to see on this half, right, is a cat ear sequence, and then on this half, another one. But it doesn't really look great from this point of view. So flipping back over, told you I'd be jumping around a little bit. We're almost done. Basically, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that I actually think this is the all one spring fractal right here. It's just really ugly. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way to draw it, per se. I do think that probably the best way to do it, I kind of been goofing off on here, is something like that. So that this is actually higher. This I was just kind of playing around to see if I could make it touch, and it does, but I actually think this is more accurate because this dips below. That's typical on the bridge. You can see it happened here too. If you were to draw the arc, it actually dips below it in that point. And when you do that, everything kind of falls together real nicely and neatly on this chart. It's still not perfect. It's a little bit hard to see, the forest through the trees, if you will. But I definitely saw it. This is the first cab. I drew this a while ago on the left-hand side. And you can see that's the same sequence, right? This has within it, has within it a bridge. So it has this nasty drop, and then it has a bridge, right, which spikes, and then it has a little cat ear sequence, and this is the same thing. It's the drop, here's the bridge with the cat ear sequence. So then on the other side, you would expect to see what? Like the bridge as well. And there it is. It's just falling down, being sucked down. So the rest of this then makes a little bit more sense. This looks like that honestly, this looks like that head and shoulder region that we talk about a lot right here. Those 3 points, very distinctive, right? And you can see that there. So it almost looks like, oh no, you're just going to start doing it all over again. But really, that's what's going on in here when this finishes. So that makes me think that the only thing really left to do is just to get the actual final cat ears. And I looked at this quite a bit. And normally when you hit the bottom here, you can see it right there. When you hit the bottom, that's the start of the cat ear. And I went and looked and I checked out this fractal versus this one. And as far as I can tell, I think it's a pretty accurate match. It's not easy to sort of, it's not easy to sort of pinpoint because it's just at such a weird angle. But But then like the next question is like, well, could this then be the head, right? And it can be. However, this is where I'm getting a little confused, and I'm just going to leave it at this because I don't want to throw people off the wrong way. It's basically like normally this part is really obvious because it only comes down about halfway. But the reason it comes down about halfway often is because it's already been traded. Now, it doesn't always do that. So this is one of those things that's like sometimes, it does that, but you can see like it comes down like part of the way, right? It doesn't come all the way down to the bottom of this arc here. And it almost always matches like that perfect halfway spot. I couldn't find, this is the best I could do, this particular line, right? And it did seem to sort of catch there this morning. So it makes me think that it's possible that is what we think it is. And if that's the case, then we just really need the final ear. The only other possibility here is that, this was the spring. The only reason I don't think this was the spring is because of what happened afterwards. Like, I just think that once it's done, it's going to just move up to like 21. Once it's done in this region, I don't think it's going to stay down here very long. So I really do think that more than likely what we're looking at then is a final ear. And the final ear is usually kind of flat. If you look here, I know I draw it in a point, but it usually has this kind of flat top, almost like the ear got like bit off. It's more likely like going to be like that. And I know it's not like that here. It is like that here on the macro. See the flat top? That's the second ear. So same thing on this one. It does have a little bit of flat top on that second one. So I'm expecting something similar. So you can see here that when you get this, you see how it kind of coasts down and then it just breaks finally. I think with how severe this has been moving, we could say like, okay, this is the reaction, right, that we got. And maybe I'm not drawing it quite right. Maybe tomorrow I'm going to have to like look at this and just change it up. I see this right here and it just seems like a really clean cut. But maybe I'm not charting the right line to the right place yet, and I'm still working on it. But you can see this is a pretty severe move up, and I think that's what we saw this morning. And the rest of it down to the bottom, to me, looks like it's finished, that part of it. Now, remember, this is all part of like one thing, so it's a little confusing. So when you go into the closer sequence, you're going to find that basically like you're going to see this is a hand, right? Like a paw. And then this is another ear starting to form. So when you zoom in, it's going to look kind of different, right? It's going to look a little more sideways, perhaps, and down. And then when you zoom back out, it's going to look, hopefully, when we see it finish, like this. And I do think that the most likely thing to happen is a double bottom. I don't think it needs to go lower than it did today, but who knows? And we also know that when you do get that spring, that we don't want to see it iterate sideways, like halfway down, and start dropping from there, because that means that it failed. Like what you want is you want to see it basically succeed. So it shouldn't have to come down any further than the previous. Yeah, and I looked at this and I was like, oh, it's like the Skyfall kitty falling into the water. This is the end. That's like Adele or whatever. But I was like, the Skyfall kitty. And then when you went to the, if you go to the close-up view, this is where I'll stop after we look at these. Oh my goodness. You can see that this is the hand, right? And I have only a couple different things. I'm just going to post them. I'm not going to get into it too much. Just a couple options. So if this is the arc, this is your paw, your ear, your second ear, also falling down. I have this weird feeling it's going to be really dramatic though. like something like this, just because of how dramatic it has been, like the movements today. And then when we were looking at that other Skyfall kitty, that it was like really getting sucked down. So this is also a possibility. What I'm trying to do is like see if I could place the fractal within this section in a way that it traverses these dark regions where it hasn't basically picked up volume yet, because I think that's the goal. This is sort of a weird one. This is like if this is not finished, right? If this is the bridge and the bridge really isn't finished, then I would expect it to sort of have this fake breakdown, come back up, and it would finish this channel higher, and then it would break down for like another spring, which would be really annoying. And it would have to basically iterate from there and go sideways again. I don't think that's going to happen at this point, just because that's not the way I'm interpreting this right here. And then a final option that I didn't draw was that this could take all the way up till like Friday, basically. And I know that that would be a little bit painful, but it's possible that this could go sideways quite a bit. We don't know how much they're going to want down here. And so even though I do think that, to me anyways, this was very much, these are speed lines. We're definitely indicating like we're in a hurry here. Like, let's get this over with. This is just me drawing stuff, so it doesn't matter, right? It can pass this point and still run, or it could go underneath here and start curving around, right? And this becomes this sort of like slingshot. I can see either one happening. And so if that happens, it could take a while for this to start moving up, a couple days. I don't think that we should look at other stocks that might be moving really hard and say, oh, AMC is going to do exactly that. If it does that, cool. But if not, we have like an idea of what may happen. So anyways, that's it. That's all I got for you today. Hope you all have a good one. We'll talk to you later. Oops.